Good evening, YouTube, BookTube, whoever is out there. Time to make a video. It is a Monday night here in Southwest Michigan. It is 5:23 in the evening. It is dark outside. It is a Monday. It is November the 12th. Tomorrow, the 13th, hopefully my wife will be home at this time tomorrow. I talked to her this afternoon on the phone, and she expects her plane to land in Gerald F. Ford. Is it Gerald Ford's airport? I call it Grand Rapids Airport. Around 3 o'clock, she said she'd give me a call when her plane lands there in GR. So tomorrow, hopefully she'll be back here in the Hermit Hut. Usually people do Monday reads. I might do a Monday reads some other time, because I don't know if I have enough time to do what I want to do. I mentioned in my previous video about sharing my reflections on this novel, The Future Won't Be Long, a novel by Jarett, Kobek. And I mentioned that I have put this novel down in the lower level. And then I was watching, I think this week or last week, a review of this novel by Mark Nash. And I went down the lower level and I got it back out. When I got it back up, I had read around 220 pages, something like that. And I've been reading it since, let me see, since last week. And rereading it and thinking about it. And I said in my video, I might share my reflections. But then I said that I find it difficult because I have to write it separately from my diary. And you probably guys don't know this, but years ago when I was teaching adult Sunday school, I always wrote my Sunday school lessons in my diary, or I had them attached to my diary. And the same thing when I did my sermons when I was in seminary. I always did it like I'd be writing in my diary. But didn't say it always worked. I mean, sometimes what I'd do is I'd get my diary and then I would type it into some kind of way that could be presented by speech. It didn't always work, but like I said, I'm a diary writer, and I think like a diary writer, and I make videos like a diary, and it's just how I've been doing it for so many years. It's become ingrained in me. But I did sit down this afternoon and write out reflections on the novel The Future Won't Be Long by Jarett, Kobek. And I just read these reflections. They're just a couple paragraphs. So this won't be long. I'll try not to digress from what I have written here. I do want to read some examples from the novel. I first heard about this novel from a booktuber, Mark Nash, back in February of 2018. In Nash's video, he mentioned that he had read a novel by Kobek titled I Hate the Internet. I have not read I Hate the Internet, but I do know that the characters in that novel reappear in The Future Won't Be Long. Now, how I know that is that when I got this, I think I bought this from Amazon. And every time I buy a novel, I go on the internet and I read reviews. I go to YouTube and try to find interviews or the writer talking in some bookstore or some symposium or some seminar about his novel or his writings. So around that time in February, I had read or heard that he wrote this The future won't be long. He wrote this before he wrote I Hate the Internet. What I'm trying to say, this came first, and then he wrote I Hate the Internet. He hadn't published this, as far as I remember. But when I Hate the Internet became a sensation, then he published this. You know, he was making money on I Hate the Internet. He was getting a lot of buzz. People were reviewing it, and you know, I have not read it. Mark Nash really liked it. So then he published this. So the characters in the future won't be long are found first of all in I Hate the Internet. And supposedly this is the beginning of the characters. And then I think from what I remember, I Hate the Internet is 20 years into the future of these characters, as far as I can remember. Anyway, one sees writers publishing earlier material after one of the books becomes popular. You always see that. A writer he'll write something and it'll get a lot of buzz, it'll get a lot of good reviews, and then all of a sudden they'll start digging up his short stories or his essays, or maybe a novel that didn't get much notice at the time, but now that his other works have become hot items, then they start republishing things that were not really didn't sell at the time. You know what I'm talking about. What I want to focus on is how Kobek paints the world in his novel. See, you know, we could look at this, we could look at a novel from many different angles, or you know, different ways of reviewing it. But when I look at a novel, one of the things I look at is how they represent reality. How do they, in their novel, present not only their character development, but what is their world and life view? What is their philosophy of life? What is their value system? What do they find important? What kind of ethics do they want to what's the word? What kind of ethics or philosophy of life they want you to embrace, or they want to present to you as something that is a viable way to live and to live out your life in this world. Okay. What I want to focus is on how Kobek paints the world in his novel. The future won't be long. The novel was first described to me as setting forth the New York City club scene back in the 80s. And that's when Mark Nash mentioned that always fascinated me, the 80s in New York City, because you have Andy Warhol, you have the factory, you have the music scene, you have the rise of the gay movement, and you have all these things that are going on in New York City. The AIDS epidemic, and you know, all those kinds of things. And I've always been interested in New York City, not only in the 80s, but the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, all up throughout the history of New York City. And as you all guys know, I collect books on New York City from its beginning up until the present time. So that's one thing that attracted me to the novel. So that's why I bought it. But when I got into it, when I started reading it, you know, I began to see things I didn't know about. But, you know, I didn't really know what, you know, I had to read the novel before I began to understand or know what the content of the novel, what it was going to set forth. Okay, as I got into this novel, I noticed right away it was focused on gay sex. That's one thing. One of the main characters is Baby. He leaves the Midwest. He comes to New York City because of he would be free. He lived in a very small town, I think in Wisconsin, Hicktown, and he leaves and he goes to New York City because he wants to live free as a gay as a gay man. As I got into it, was focused on gay sex, drugs, and nightlife, where what is like in these clubs, these where there's a lot of sex, a lot of drugs, drag queens, you know, people taking all kinds of drugs, cocaine, ecstasy, anything they can get their hands on. And as they're engaged in this activity of drug taking, they are into all kinds of forms of perversion. At first, in reading this novel, I thought the writer Kobek was describing the decadent life of pimps, whores, drag queens, homosexuals, homeless people, drug addicts, just to show his readers his approval of this world. See, at first I kind of thought, well, he's describing all this very decadent and very rotten world because he's saying, well, this is really cool. But the more I got into this novel, I began to see Kobek was seeking to show us, the readers, that the world has become totally rotten. See, that's what I began to now, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that Kobek, obviously, when he writes this novel, and he writes certain scenes, and he has certain characters, and he's describing, he's being very selective. And what he selects as these scenes about in the clubs, and in the bedrooms, and in the alleyways, and on the streets, and in the gay bar bathrooms, and all these different scenes, he shows this decadence, this perversion, this rottenness, and he's trying to. He uses these scenes and these to reinforce his philosophy. Now, what is his philosophy? Well, he says it, as you read in the novel, it says here, but the more I got into this novel, I began to see Kobek was seeking to show us how the reason of the world has become totally rotten. I think Kobek sees himself as a nihilist. There is a line in the novel on page 210 that I see as a key that opens the meaning of or purpose of this novel. And this is the sentence. It's on page 210. And this is, I think this is one of the characters, Adeline, who utters this line. No, it could be Baby. It's one of those main characters. This is the line, as if there had been an unspoken group decision that the future could be confronted only through descent into banality of petite nihilism. I, Baby, was far more comfortable with grandiose nihilism. After all, I knew Michael Hegel. Now, Michael Hegel, he's one of the major figures in the club scene in New York City, and as you read further into the novel, he becomes a drug addict, and he becomes just totally rotten. But what is the meaning of nihilism? I looked it up in the dictionary. It says, I could get a couple of glasses, clear my throat here. Nihilism is, quote, general rejection of usual beliefs in morality, religion, etc. And so as you read the novel, The Future Will Belong, Kobek rejects any kind of morality, any idea of morality. Anything goes. There is no morality. Everybody just does their own thing. Being a pimp, being a whore, being a drag queen, being a drug addict, whatever it might be, it doesn't matter. If you want to stay stoned on drugs, if you want to live in the cesspool, you know, that's cool. That's just there is nothing else. It's just, there's no meaning to life, basically. The novel, The Future Won't Be Long, Kobek sets forth a world lies where nihilism is embraced. That's why the characters in the novel live inside computers. Now, there's a part in the novel And I was thinking about this. One of the main characters, Adeline, lives in New York City. She goes out to San Francisco, and she gets involved in the computer gaming scene. And one of her boyfriends is this guy who from makes computer games, and he's involved in computers. And I thought to myself, why did the writer Kobek brought all this computer stuff in? Well, I know probably from the book that was published, I Hate the Internet, there must be more to it than what I know or thought about. But as I thought about it, well, the people there in San Francisco who were involved, that she gets involved in, Adeline, people who are involved in the computer world and the gaming world and graphic games on computer, like, you know, all these games that you see advertised. I'm not into gaming. I don't know about these video games or anything. But some people escape into drugs. Some people escape into homosexuality. Some people escape into, you know, false religions. They escape into despair. They escape into nihilism. But some people just escape into the world of video games. They can't be in the real world because it's totally meaningless. And so they escape into this fictional world where the machine-made like world that's by gamers, by people who are involved in the internet and gaming and things like that. That's my basic guess. So that's why the characters in this novel live inside computers, flee any kind of normal relationships, take drugs, become drug addicts, live in the cesspool of life. There's nothing to live for but the moment. And it's better to live each moment stoned out of your mind, or just fleeing from one person, fleeing from one place to another, almost like you're lost. These people have no grounding. They have no center. They're just out of control. There's nothing ruling their lives. They are what we call as Christians slaves of sin. They're just dragged from one thing to the next. And as they give in more and more to their own depravity, they sink deeper and deeper into the cesspool. Or they sink deeper and deeper into nihilism or existentialist despair, or just life is meaningless. So they take up whatever they can find each day to somehow keep them going. One thing else you notice throughout the novel, every relationship is dysfunctional. There is no family that is normal. And you see that in the first sentence of the novel on page 1. And this is when Baby leaves his small town in Wisconsin, is going to New York City. And this is the first line, the first sentence on page 1. The novel opens with this sentence, quote, "I moved to New York not long after my mother killed my father, or was it my father who murdered my mother? Anywho, in a red haze of blood and broken bone, one did it and the other." So, you know, that's his first sentence. And I kind of think that kind of sets the tone of the whole novel. Everything is dysfunctional. If the family is broken, if the mother is dead, the father is dead, then everything is broken. Everything has repercussions. The novel has many scenes of decadence or moral or cultural deterioration, a state of absolute decadence. I could just go here and read you one scene after another, but as I look at my clock, this thing's getting too long. But the novel is just full of decadence, of these scenes of just utter degradation, utter just rottenness. You know, it's just one scene after another of just people living lawlessness. Today I read some more of the novel. I was reading this at the Book Nook. Today I volunteered at the Book Nook, the library used bookstore, and I was reading this, and I came across this sentence. Most reviewers, and see, one of the main characters, Baby, is the one who comes to New York City, takes on the gay lifestyle. Later on in the novel, he becomes this kind of underground kind of science fiction writer. I know it's kind of far-fetched, but he's describing in this sentence his approach to writing science fiction. He says, most of the reviewer, he has written something and it was published and he's making money and he's using this money to support his drug habit and his decadent lifestyle. Most reviewers situated Trapped, that was his novel, within a trend of new literary works encompassing the outward aesthetics of gender fiction. Comparisons included Robert Coover, Thomas Pynchon, and Don DeLeo. A sizable minority rejected this view, believing it closer to the nihilistic literature of Britton Houston Ellis. See, right there, Kobek would describe his novel as nihilistic literature. That's what it is. It's a manifesto of nihilism. Now, after I wrote this review, or my reflections, I went on Google and I just typed in Jarett Kobek nihilism. And I came across a review of I Hate the Internet that somebody wrote in Amazon. And I'll just read this and I'll close. And I haven't read I Hate the Internet, but this is a little review that someone wrote in Amazon. This book, whose author calls our modern social media innovators, corporations, and techies. He disposes the sanctity of the internet using irony, blasphemy, irreverence, and abstruse language. Kind of sounds like the future won't be long. Indeed, author Kobek lays bitter waste to the effectiveness of it. People, modern-day PR, social media sites like Twitter, Snapchat, and Facebook. The book was filled with, at times, incoherent and too lengthy rants, and yet inside the narratives of pretty much unrelatable characters whom I struggle to like, I felt a sense of their existential despair. See, and that's the same kind of, you see that in the characters, and the future won't be long. I felt a sense of their existential despair, their roto-rooters far deeper, and then the common refrain of what's it all about, Alfie. The book opened up a stream of thought that maybe we lay people are being made fools of by the likes of the media gods. He's a tell-all author with no remorse. After reading the book, I now look at the internet and social media with a more skeptical eye. I now question, is the ever-awareness of God, which is one person's version of the internet, is actually ruinous, nihilistic, and ceaselessly destructive. Indeed, author Kobek, nothing is sacred. His book that serves up caustic derisiveness of the impact of social media along with a big dose of existential despair. You could also call this a big dose of existential despair. So anyway, these are just, I could go on, you could probably look at this novel by Kobek, The Future Will Be Long, and you could just write pages and pages of a really extensive, in-depth book review. I'm just sharing some kind of scattered thoughts and reflections. But I thought to myself, so that's the world that's out there. And that's the world that people tell me that's a better world than being a Christian. So I don't know. To me, what he now, I'm not saying he's doing this deliberately. I think he is, but maybe he's just painting the world the way he sees it. But everybody does that. I mean, you can be very stark and very realistic and very blunt when you show your world or paint your ethics or your philosophy in a novel or in a short story, whatever. You can dress it up with pink dresses and, you know, big, you know, bows, whatever. But underneath, it's still death. Underneath it all, you know, it's like looking at a candy bar. It looks sweet, but when you bite into it, you bite into a dead rat. So anyway, I just thought I'd share these thoughts, reflections on the novel "The Future Won't Be Long" by Jarett Kobek. I know this is how I talk to my wife when she's here. This is how, you know, I'm always talking to my wife about what I'm reading, and these are the kinds of ways. This is how I kind of do it. I just kind of throw all this stuff out there. And I thought, since my wife is gone and you guys might want to hear my reflections on the novel "The Future Won't Be Long" by Jarett Kobek, I thought I'd just do it. So I'll sign off, and I might do a Monday Reads. I don't know. I'll just see how it goes. Hope you have a good week. Thank you for the new subscribers. If you got any questions, any comments, if you read this book, you can share your thoughts. And anyway, I'll sign off. Have a good night. Bye.